Over the weekend, I'm sure you saw, we were bombarded with the news. Former President Obama, he's given a commencement speech, which was carried live by all these networks, and he had a little pointed criticism at Trump by name. I'm just kidding. He did one of those weird, like, well,
very
some
vague,
people are acting like children, and you can't act that way. Let's take a listen.
More than anything, this pandemic has finally torn back the curtain on the idea that so many of the folks in charge know what they're doing. A lot of them aren't even pretending to be in charge. If the world's going to get better, it's going to be up to you. With everything suddenly feeling like it's up for grabs, this is your time to seize the initiative.
Oh, that's just classic Obama.
He's so passive aggressive always. But
just call him out by name.
Well, also, honestly, his criticism could almost just as easily apply to Nancy Pelosi. Like, Democrats are in charge of one part of government here. So I don't know if he really noticed that. I mean, the whole speech, there wasn't a whole lot there. There was another quote that really grabbed me, actually, where he was talking about how big, broad majorities agree on the ends in terms of economic, environmental justice, and health care for everybody. That's why folks with power will keep trying to divide you over the means. That's how nothing changes. You get a system that looks out for the rich and powerful and nobody else. Mm-hmm. First of all, yes, broad majorities of the American public do agree on the ends, but actually not the people that run this town.
Right.
And not the people who fund the people that run this town. Oh, and by the way, you were president for 8 years. What did you do about it?
That's the part that drives me nuts. It's like an observer of politics. He always acted this
exactly.
way.
It's always removed.
Just looking at Washington, be like, you're the president. Like, you have an actual ability to massively swing events, and he just refused to do it.
So it's got to be frustrating. I don't know if it is or not, but it should be frustrating to people too who are in that resistance left, that he is so vague, that he's been so removed, that he hasn't inserted himself into any of this. So much is changing radically with, dramatically different trajectories that the country could be set on right now. And he's basically absent.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Basically absent.
But see, the thing is, they love that because he's like a statesman. He's above the fray. He can't sacrifice.
He's not getting his hands dirty with politics.
Getting his hands dirty. I mean, one thing that you all might have noticed, as I did, is there was a little J.P. Morgan Chase thing up there, and that's because this entire event was actually brought to everybody by J.P. Morgan Chase, called "Show Me Your Walk" HBCU edition. It featured NBA players, owners, corporate CEOs, artists, Kamala Harris, and Kevin Hart was the one who was hosting it. So I thought that was just a little bit
racial and economic justice, brought to you by J.P. Morgan Chase.
And what was even better is, as my friend Swin over at the Daily Beast points out, is he talked about you shouldn't be sitting at home watching Tiger King on TV. And of course, it was very Obama admin alum of him to use that opportunity to plug his new corporate home. Of course, you'll remember that him and his wife have a multi-million-dollar deal with Netflix. And it just happens that Michelle has a documentary streaming over there right now, and that they have all these deals financed for them in some nice lucrative package, which pays
the one thing he got specific on.
Yeah, he was like
everything else was sort of.
I don't think it's a conspiracy theory.
No.
But why is the former president inking multi-million-dollar deals with entertainment? Weird.
It's part of the culture in this town. I mean, look, he's no different than any of the other ones.
No, it's just exactly the same.
And the presidential level is, of course, the highest order. You have the most lucrative opportunities available to you. But everyone in this town sees it as their right and their privilege to cash in on their public service.
Oh,
hasn't always been that way. I mean, Jimmy Carter hasn't chosen that path. He's chosen to continue a very modest, humble life. And I think that is the appropriate path forward for a public servant, because you can't help but let those imagined riches in the future and your potential employers impact what you're doing while you're in this town.
Of course. And, I thought that let's think about the dynamic even further. Joe Biden is running for president and is not being met with nearly the amount of hagiography that this entire Obama event is being met with. I mean, in terms of HBCUs and all. I mean, Biden is the one who's cast himself as a defender of the black community, saying that they're the ones who put me on top, South Carolina, and all of that. It very much goes to show how President Obama so far eclipses him in the public mind that it's crazy. I mean, the person who's the Democratic nominee for president should should be the most famous person in America outside of the president. I mean, just truly, like in terms of trying to drive the politics, trying to drive the conversation. And if your failure is ever to live up to that, then you're obviously going to have a problem winning. Now, the dynamics here are pretty crazy, but it was called out by Peter Navarro, actually, White House advisor, who was on the Sunday shows. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Well, I'm glad Mr. Obama has a new job as Joe Biden's press secretary. I note for the record that in his speech that I read, there was no mention of manufacturing, no mention of China. As far as I'm concerned, his administration was a kumbaya of incompetence in which we saw millions of manufacturing jobs go off to China.
I mean, you know, the partisan stuff aside, I do think that is an astute thing, which is that ultimately, like, Obama kind of is the press secretary of the Biden campaign, because if you look at his social media numbers, his following, his favorability ratings with the public, and so much more, it's clear that when people vote for Biden, so much of it is attached to the Obama legacy. And that's, look, the good and the bad, which is, as we cover here, I mean, the Obama legacy is not something really to be proud of or all that proud of. And yet you look at the way that he wants, Biden is so trying to tie himself to Obama when Obama always knew that Biden would not necessarily be a good president. He didn't even endorse him in this election. It took him, days for him to do so.
And reportedly discouressed him from running. And for sure, in 2016, cleared the pathway for Hillary and discouraged Joe from running. So he's sort of, if he's a press secretary, he's sort of a reluctant one. And we saw how it worked out before, not just with Hillary Clinton, but in midterm elections when President Obama would try to confer his own popularity onto another politician. Doesn't really work out. But you're absolutely right. I mean, Joe Biden didn't really do anything in the primary. He didn't, half of these states he won, he didn't campaign in. They didn't have any money. Like, when he would go out in public, it was kind of a disaster. The debate performances were lackluster on their best days, and we'd be like, wow, there was a coherent moment. Joe crushed it, But he was very effective at tying himself to that Obama legacy. And there is a very strong urge. There was during the primary, and even more so now, to just let's just be able to not be freaked out every day. Let's just go back to a time when things were a little more calm, a little more even, where it wasn't like some madness and insanity and chaos every day. I mean, that pitch, as sort of uninspiring as it is, and as inadequate as it was ultimately, especially for working class people in this country, and the dynamic that would lead to a racial justice brought to you by Chase, as bad as all of that is, it sounds a lot better right now in this moment, that restoration argument, than it ever has. I was thinking about, Joe Biden is really sort of saved by the fact that this pandemic allows him to just do these Zoom calls from his basement and do these little managed softball interviews, et cetera. Because if he was trying to have rallies, if there was no pandemic and it was normal times and he's trying to have rallies, what would that look like? What would that energy level be like? How many people would be showing up for Joe Biden? Because he's completely eclipsed by not just Barack Obama, but a number of other figures within the Democratic Party. I guarantee you AOC or, Sanders, before he sort of
Pelosi,
lost the energy in his own. A lot of other people are more famous, more popular, inspire a lot more energy and excitement. It's hard to imagine a lot of people really showing up for Joe Biden.
Certainly. I mean, you can see this so much in the public sentiment and the way that people look at him, which is kind of oh, okay. It's not very much I am excited to vote for Joe. Lowest enthusiasm numbers for a Democratic nominee in modern history. And you can see so much of what is driving it is just anti-Trumpism more than anything else. And as you say, having the Never Trumpers be kind of the centerpiece of the Democratic Party encapsulates that more than anything, which is that they stand for nothing except that they're not Trump. And that might be enough. I mean, look, I read a 538 piece this morning all about how seniors are going away from Trump across the board as a national average. That we're talking about either being tied or underwater with seniors in a demographic, and in states where he won, seniors 55 and over, not just 65, at a 13-point margin. That's a huge disaster for the Trump campaign. It's probably the number one impediment to their reelection right now.
And that's who the Obama era was also best for.
Loved it.
Right? Because you're past your peak earning years, you're more established in your career, so they weren't the ones, by and large, I don't want to say people didn't suffer during the recession. Of course, there were plenty of seniors and older folks who did. But by and large, they were in a more stable position to be able to weather that storm.
Better off on average than others.
Yeah, and they were, too old to have to go and fight and die in the wars that were continuing under the Obama administration. So of all the demographic groups, that age cohort, that era was the best for. So it makes sense that they would find, not only during the primary, but right now, the Biden restoration argument more appealing than other age cohorts. I mean, we do see Trump doing better with younger Americans, which I think is an interesting dynamic to explore, not just for this election, but also for moving forward. Democrats have very much assumed the future is ours because we can just take these people for granted. I don't think you can do that. But seniors turn out and vote, especially right now, seniors turn out and vote. They feel that not just their livelihoods, but their actual lives are at stake and on the line. And for them, by and large, the Obama era was a pretty good thing.
Yeah, certainly was.
All right, we'll have more Rising for you after this.